You're being interrupted, Mom. You're being interrupted.
What's happening?
Look at that contraction.
When I finish speaking, you have 10 seconds, and then it will explode.
Stare at Safta as she eats.
Are you taking pictures? Just don't yell.
But turn it on, Mom.
Can you hear me now?
The other one.
Also, she presses the other button. Let's give it over. You can tell, like,
See how that works. So, Mom,
Jeff, is that a video?
we're trying to do Gizmo. We're trying to do Gizmo. So let us know if you can hear Rafi after he
First of all,
speaks.
they're locked.
If I speak.
We're
Oh,
trying.
there you go.
she's not wearing the microphone.
That's
Let her borrow the microphone.
No, Rafi's wearing a mic,
Tell
and
Safta.
she can hear it.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Mom,
What did you say?
oh,
Why did you
we're using this new Gizmo. Rafi's going to wear the mic. We'll see if you can hear him, okay?
Oh, that was amazing.
Brought to you by Apple.
That's good, that's good.
Thank you all for coming. Being in Chanukah, it's very apropos that we have a Seudos Hoda'ah because it says that after they came into the Beis Hamikdash, V'kavu Shmeinas Mechanukah Elu L'Hoda'is L'Halel. So these are days which anyway we have to give Hoda'ah and thanks to Hashem. And so it's a very opportune time to have a Seudos Hoda'ah from Meir Michal. There's an interesting thing that we say after we light the Chanukah candles, and that is the Haneros Halalu. So in Haneros Halalu, which is basically brought down in Maseches Seifrim, Perek Chav, it says, Haneros Ha'elu Kodesh, ve'ein lan reshus l'shtamish behen, el l'reisen bulvad, kidei l'haydais l'shimcha and l'fleisecha, slightly different gifts from what we have. But again, it says that the candles that we have, you do not have permission to use them, except to look at them. Kidei lahodos l'shimcha, like we say, kidei lahodos l'halal. So the question arises, how is it that because you're not allowed to use the candles, that will create, or that's in order to bring Hoda'ah thanks to the Nes of Chanukah? We have other mitzvahs that you're not necessarily allowed to use the actual mitzvah, like your lulav, you can't just use to sweep the floor on Sukkot, because that's an embarrassment to the mitzvah. So by the Chanukah candles, even if we're not allowed to use them, that should be understood. But why should that be Kidei Lahodos Lahalel, and create a thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah, when he talks about the Nes, he says that they had one of the Nisim was the fact that the Neiros lasted 8 days. The Chachamim in that generation decreed Sheyu Shmeinas Hayomim Eilush Tchilas and Chafhei B'Kislev Yimei Simcha v'Halel. These should be days of Simcha and Halel. Umadlikin behen Haneiros be'erev Pesach Habatim Cholayla v'Layla Lirois u'Legales Hanes. So he says that the mitzvah during these days of Yimei Simcha v'Halel is to light. That's one thing. There should be days of Simcha and Halal, and also we should light the Neiros. V'yamim elu hein hanekroin Chanukah, and they're also behesped u'b'tainis. V'hadlakas haneiros. He ends off the lighting of the candles behen mitzvah midivrei seifrim kikriyas hamegillah. The Rambam equates the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles to kriyas hamegillah. So okay, it's another mitzvah that comes from Chachamim, mitzvah d'Rabbanan, but then later the Rambam again equates the kriya of the Megillah to the Halakas Neiros Chanukah. Second. The next halacha. Kol shechayev b'kriyas ha-Megillah, chayev halokas ner Chanukah. Anybody who's chayev in kriyas ha-Megillah, anyone who's chayev in reading the Megillah on Purim, is also chayev halokas ner Chanukah. So, what exactly is the comparison to reading the Megillah to the mitzvah of ner Chanukah? And later on in Parak Dalet Halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam also says, mitzvah ner Chanukah, mitzvah chaviva hi ad ma'od, v'tzarech adam lizaher ba, that the mitzvah of lighting the ner is Chanukah, is a mitzvah chaviva hi ad ma'od, v'tzarech adam lizaher ba, the person has to be careful with it, kidei lahidia hanes, u'lahaisif b'shvach hakel, v'hidia la'alanisim sha'asa lanu. A person has to be very careful and go out of his way, even if he doesn't have the money to do so, to light ner is Chanukah, in order, the Rambam adds, in order to bring to the Hidiyah HaNes, to tell over the Nes. So again, Kriyas HaMegillah, when we lay in the Megillah, so that's the storyline of Purim, so we can understand how that tells us about the Nes. That tells us about the storyline of Purim. But where do we see in the Ner is Chanukah the storyline? It's just, we light the menorah. So you have to ask someone, oh, what happened? And then they'll tell you. But when you lay in the Megillah, everything's in front of you. You have the whole story right in front of you. The candles alone don't tell you anything about the Nes. There's no Hallel that's going to be created just by looking at the candles. The Rambam also mentions, while discussing this, in going through the halachas of Chanukah, he throws in that certain days we say complete Hallel, and certain days we don't say complete Hallel, and on Purim, we don't say any Hallel. So the Rambam is of the opinion that why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Shekriyas HaMegillah hi ha-Hallel. The Kriyas HaMegillah, that's the Hallel. We don't have a necessity to say Hallel because the Kriya of the Megillah itself is Hallel. So the question remains that if Kriyas HaMegillah is the Hallel, so that would mean that the Rambam is equating lighting Neres Chanukah to actually being a form of Hallel that's being said on Chanukah. Not to be connected to the Hallel that we say in Shul tomorrow morning and through the next week, but that the Neiros themselves, when we light them, they themselves are a form of Hallel. So how does this translate? How does this become Hallel? So also in Maseches Seifrim, it also points out when it's talking about completing Hallel, when you say full Hallel, it says that you say, one of the times that we say complete Hallel is all the days of Chanukah, and it says, V'tzarech levarech v'tchilasam, you have to make a bracha in the beginning, L'kreisan b'ne'ima. You have to read this b'ne'ima, which is still disputable with the thought of the name, but you should read Hallel b'ne'ima, with more of a joyous, singing, pleasantness. That's how the Rambam describes complete Hallel. When you say complete Hallel, whether it's on Sukkot or on Chanukah, it should be done with ne'imas. Then we find another earlier Maseches Seifrim, which says, Ner Chanukah, Mitzvah Hanichai, Pesach Hasamach L'Shus HaRabim. When you light your Ner Chanukah, in those days when they used to light the Neres Chanukah by the doorway, so it says you should light it by the Samach L'Shus HaRabim, Shetehei Mezuzah B'Yamin v'Ner Chanukah Mismol, that the Mezuzah should be on the right side of the door, and the Ner Chanukah should be Mismol on the left side of the door. Hayim Mashenemar, Mayofis U'Mana'am. Mayofis v'Mezuzah, U'Mana'am v'Ner Chanukah. That Mayofis in the pasuk refers to the mitzvah Mezuzah, U'Mana'am refers to mitzvah Ner Chanukah. So we see that there's a direct correlation that in the Ner Chanukah that there is a ne'imus. So that which we have, complete Hallel, where we say that it has to be said with ne'imus, Ner Chanukah alone represents complete Hallel. So how do the Neres Chanukah sing that song? So possibly, if you ask people what the difference between Purim, why we have to have a Seudah, and on Chanukah where you don't have to have a Seudah. So one of the reasons brought down is because by Purim, they were saved physically. The decree was on them physically. While on Chanukah, they were not necessarily, the decree was not for them to be wiped out. It was only that they would not be able to be Isaac and mitzvahs and learn Torah. And that's one of the reasons that we don't have to necessarily sit down and have a Seudah on Chanukah. But if you know the story, The decree on Chanukah was only that you can't do mitzvahs. But at the end of the day, there was a large battle, which we say in Al Nisim, that we thank Hashem, that we won, that we were able to come away still alive. So why is there no halal for that? So possibly we have two halals on Chanukah. We have the halal that we say in Shul, that we say b'peh. That's like when we say Kriyas HaMegillah, and that's the halal. That we say with our guf. That halal is for the fact that we had an nitzuach, a winning in the Milchama, and we came out victorious. But the Aruch HaShulchan, when he's bringing down the Orchos Chanukah, so he says, part of the Nisim that they were given over to the Oiskei HaTorah, Gomar HaNes, talking about the Milchama, Haya b'chav he b'kislev, v'oid nes acher her lahem en hashemayim, al yidei ner mitzvah v'Torah. The completion of the nes was on chav he b'kislev. And another nes that Hashem showed to them was al yidei ner mitzvah v'Torah, the nearest of the Chanukah. So I was thinking to say that the fact that the nearest Chanukah, you're not allowed to use them, creates, like we find by the bracha of marriage, that Isser, forbidden, something forbidden, creates a level of Kedusha. It creates in itself an inherent Kedusha, something that you have to value and cherish because it's forbidden, but that creates a certain importance to that. So the Neres Chanukah, by them not being allowed to be used, you're forced to look at the Neres Chanukah, and the only thing that you can see that the Ner Chanukah represents is the Nes of Chanukah of Esek HaTorah. The fact that we came in, we won, so physically we were able to live. But how do we know that we were able to keep on and perpetuate our Esek HaTorah and our mitzvahs? That was all you did, the nes of the Hashem, and the fact that Hashem let it just keep going for 8 days. Through that nes, I'm not going to get it, through that nes, we were able to see. And that is the halal. That's the second halal that takes place on Chanukah. In the morning, we say b'peh, that for our guf. But for our ruchnius, for our spirituality that we're able to come away with, that is just by looking at the Ner Chanukah alone. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and thank my parents for all that they allowed in the house, and anybody who helped out, and I hope that this works. Did this help? I guess not. Thank you very much. Enjoy.